Set in the midst of the 21st century in cyberpunk Japan, Ghost in the Shell follows the members of Public Security Section 9 as they crack down on domestic terrorism and cyber warfare. Despite being equipped with state-of-the-art cybernetics and weaponry, former Detective Togusa opts instead to use a Mateba Autorevolver, a rare and somewhat obsolete firearm even by today's standards. Is there any reason why he picked the Mateba other than to fulfill the trope of a detective with a revolver? Let's find out. The Mateba Model 6 Unica, more commonly known as the Mateba Autorevolver, is a recoil-operated semi-automatic revolver designed by Emilio Ghisoni, who also designed the Chiappa Rhino, another popular Italian revolver. The revolver was manufactured by Ghisoni's company Mateba, which has since gone defunct due to poor sales, making Mateba revolvers very rare and highly valued. Ghisoni's revolvers are better known for their unconventional barrel alignment, which aligns the barrel of the gun with the bottommost chamber of the revolver cylinder rather than the top like traditional revolvers. The reason for this was to improve accuracy by reducing muzzle climb due to recoil. The lower bore axis lies closer to the shooter's hand, thus mitigating the effects of the upward recoil motion compared to normal revolvers. In addition to this design quirk, the Mateba Autorevolver is divided into the upper and lower assemblies, with the upper assembly mounted on rails onto the lower assembly. This allows the upper assembly to move relative to the lower assembly when fired. Recoil from firing the gun moves the upper assembly rearwards, which cocks the hammer and prepares the weapon for a second round. The upper assembly then moves forward and rotates the cylinder to a new chamber, readying the weapon to be fired again. This also allowed the autorevolver to have a lighter single-action trigger pull, allowing for snappier and more accurate shooting. The autorevolver's recoil operation makes it one of the few semi-automatic revolvers ever designed, with other notable examples being the Landstadt revolver and the Webley Forsberry automatic revolver, in which manual operation is not required to cock the hammer or rotate the cylinder. These unique design choices make the autorevolver a prized collectible among firearms collectors, helped along by its rarity due to being out of production. A rarer, carbine variant of the autorevolver, called the Griffin, was also available for purchase. The standard model came with an 18-inch barrel, handguard, buttstock, and barrel shroud. The buttstock came in two varieties, a traditional solid wooden stock and a skeletonized metal stock with a wood cheek rest. The autorevolver is capable of firing in 357 Magnum, 41 Magnum, 44 Magnum, and 454 Kasu. Revolvers firing in 357 Magnum and 44 Magnum can also fire in 38 Special and 44 Special by swapping out the recoil spring to effectively cycle the weaker rounds or using a heavier double-action trigger. Later models of the autorevolver or Griffin often came with mismatched parts, as the bankrupt Mateba was forced to continue operations while liquidating existing stock. As a result, one could have obtained a Frankenstein autorevolver with mismatched finishes or Griffin-stamped components. As the autorevolver was designed for target shooting, one would expect to find it in the hands of competition shooters and firearms collectors. Given its rarity and thus exorbitant price tag, you would be hard-pressed to find someone who is willing to take it out of their armory for a test fire, much less use it as a service weapon. Instead, the Chiappa Rhino, largely considered the successor to the autorevolver, can be seen much more commonly out at the range among civilian shooters. That said, the autorevolver and Rhino would heavily influence fictional revolver designs, with futuristic revolvers often invoking the blocky look of the autorevolver and utilizing the 6 o'clock barrel. Togusa's revolver changes depending on which adaptation you are referring to. In the original 1995 film adaptation and its sequel, Togusa uses the older sibling of the autorevolver, the Mateba 2006M. Specifically, he uses a fictionalized variant called the Mateba M2007 that fires 357 Magnum, although the concept art calls it rimless 9mm Parabellum, which is not technically incorrect. It otherwise looks almost identical to the Mateba 2006M. The second adaptation, Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex, or SAC for short, features the Mateba Autorevolver as the M2008. The M2008 mostly resembles the autorevolver, with the most notable features like the open top cylinder and the sliding frame being present. It, however, retains the barrel assembly of the 2006M, as evidenced by the lack of open slots on the upper assembly and the front of the gun being straight rather than angled. Togusa retains the 2006M in his personal collection after his M2008 is confiscated at the end of the series. Likewise, the Mateba is said to fire in 9mm rather than the more technically accurate 357 Magnum. The Arise reboot in 2013 has the Autorevolver return as the M2008 as his service weapon when working as a plainclothes police officer in the Nihama Prefectural Police, and continues to use it after his recruitment into Section 9. The SAC 2045 Netflix series, released in 2020, which is a continuation of the SAC series, does not feature the Mateba revolvers at all, with Togusa using the fictional and series iconic Saburo M5 pistol instead, the standard issue sidearm for Section 9 members. The live-action movie in 2017 has Togusa switch from the Mateba Autorevolver to the Chiappa Rhino 60DS as his sidearm, likely because it is more accessible to the movie armorer. Despite people's reservations about the movie, this change is actually pretty well thought out, as the Rhino shares many design features with the Autorevolver and can be seen as the modern iteration of it. The 2026 reboot of the Ghost in the Shell is set to see either the return of the Mateba 2006M or the Mateba Autorevolver. This reboot, which is set to follow the manga source material much closer, already has a poster that features Togusa wielding his revolver. His revolver, while retaining some of the Autorevolver's traits, such as the blocky lower assembly and possibly open top cylinder, looks more like a traditional revolver instead. The barrel of the revolver appears to be at the top of the weapon rather than the bottom, and the hammer protrudes out of the rear much more than it should. The pistol grip also lacks the flat thumb rest at the rear. Overall, the new revolver appears like a hybrid of the Autorevolver and more traditional revolvers like the Smith & Wesson Model 629. Togusa's Autorevolver seems out of place in the cyberpunk future of Ghost in the Shell. If anything, his service revolver would be more appropriate in modern-day Japan, with Japan's low crime rate and the fact that Japanese policemen still use revolvers like the new Nambu M60 or Smith & Wesson Model 360J Sakura. In either case, he will be noted as being a rather wealthy collector for owning such a rare antique and choosing to use it as his personal sidearm. Togusa's Autorevolver makes him overwhelmingly underarmed when fighting criminals as a part of Section 9, given that most of the threats they deal with often come armed with automatic weapons with far higher capacity than Togusa's 6 shots. Every single shot has to be precise, as a missed shot could spell the difference between life and death. Rationally, as a member of a counter-terrorism unit, a revolver is one of the worst possible options to have as a service weapon to frequently rely on. However, it is precisely these flaws that make the Autorevolver the perfect fit for Togusa. First and foremost, the Autorevolver could be the standard service revolver of the Japanese police in the Ghost in the Shell universe. Since Togusa was recruited to Section 9 as a police officer, it makes perfect sense that Togusa, being a newer member of Section 9, would still retain his Autorevolver before undergoing firearms training with Section 9's standard issue weapons. His Autorevolver also highlights his police background far more than using a semi-automatic pistol would. Compared to military personnel, the police have much stricter ROE when engaging targets. Combined with the 6-shot capacity of the Autorevolver, Togusa needs to be deliberate with when and what he intends to shoot. This is translated into his actions as well, with his more thoughtful approach to cases, due in part to his detective skills, coming in to serve the team well. This can be especially seen in the original film when he uses a tracking round to tail a suspect rather than blindly pursuing them, a tactic that he would reuse in the SAC series. The archaic nature of the Autorevolver serves to highlight Togusa as the most normal operative in Section 9. Just like how the revolver stands out among the sea of automatic weapons his team uses, Togusa is also the only normal member of Section 9. He possesses the least amount of cybernetics, has a family, and is also one of the few members not from a military or intelligence background. Narratively, all of these traits, along with his unusual fondness for the Autorevolver, make him appear more human to his team members, many of whom are heavily cyberized and come from military backgrounds. Major Motoko uses this reasoning for her recruitment of Togusa, stating that having him around adds versatility to the team, with his different skill set and background strengthening Section 9. So, while the auto-revolver may be impractical in Togusa's line of work, as a story device, it does quite well to emphasize how different he is from his teammates and helps to drive Motoko's philosophical dilemmas. Rather unfortunately, the Mateba Autorevolver and the older Mateba 2006M seem to be solely associated with the Ghost in the Shell franchise, with appearances outside the franchise being rather rare. As mentioned earlier, the Autorevolver is a major inspiration for futuristic revolvers, with Destiny 2 being perhaps one of the bigger sci-fi media in recent history. Destiny 2 features two exotic hand cannons modeled after the Autorevolver, that being the Ace of Spades and the Last Word. They serve as the primary firearm of Destiny's top hunter characters, Kate 6 and Shin Malfer, which plays rather well to their gunslinger trope. The Autorevolver also appears in Battlefield 4 as the Unica 6 alongside its younger sibling, the Chiappa Rhino. Chambered in 357 Magnum, the Autorevolver and Rhino were fan favourites due to their high fire rate and competed with the equally rare MP412 Rex for a spot among revolver-loving players. For an even more recent appearance of the Autorevolver, the psychological horror game Mouthwashing, released in 2024, features the Autorevolver as the only weapon in the game. The 5-inch Autorevolver is described as a Pony Express personal protection weapon and is issued to ship captains for self-defense in the event of mutiny. Out of the 3 gacha games I cover on this channel, the Autorevolver only appears in Girls Frontline as the 5-star handgun T-Doll, Unica 6. Her appearance in the game is also fairly recent, with the global servers receiving her in May 2026. She appears to be using a 6-inch barrel, although it is unknown what cartridge she uses. As mentioned earlier, despite the Autorevolver being rather rarely depicted in media, its younger sibling, the Chiappa Rhino, has managed to bring the low-bore revolver to a larger audience. The Chiappa Rhino's much wider appearance can be largely attributed to being a much greater commercial success than Ghisoni's earlier revolvers, and hence being more readily available as reference. The Chiappa Rhino appears in the anime Cat Planet Cuties, Fate Apocrypha, and Licorice Recoil. The Chiappa Rhino featured in this anime is the snub-nosed Chiappa Rhino 20DS with an incredibly short 2-inch barrel. A longer 6-inch Chiappa Rhino 60DS appears in the live-action remake of Cowboy Bebop and the aforementioned live-action Ghost in the Shell movie. The Chiappa Rhino 60DS also appears in Girls Frontline as the 5-star handgun T-Doll Rhino. Another popular low-bore firing revolver in recent times is the Russian RSH-12. Leon Kennedy wields this beefy 50 caliber revolver in Resident Evil Requiem as the Requiem Revolver. The RSH-12 is apparently a standard issue firearm for the organization that Leon works for, and can be used in-game by both Leon and Grace, each displaying different proficiency with it. A fictional low-bore firing revolver, drawing inspiration from the Autorevolver, appears in Trigun as the AGL Arms Factory 45 Long Coat. The revolver looks more like a traditional revolver, with the only quirks deviating from the norm being the 6 o'clock barrel position and a break-top mechanism for accessing the cylinder. The upper assembly houses a plant module that fires a destructive laser beam capable of obliterating cities. This revolver is used by the brothers Vash and Knives, coming in a silver and black finish respectively. While the Autorevolver is an odd choice for a retro firearm in the cyberpunk setting of Ghost in the Shell, it manages to fit in by looking futuristic enough compared to modern revolvers, and yet retaining an antique look when compared to other firearms in the series. The Autorevolver marries the dichotomy of old and new, serving to highlight the differences between the mostly human Togusa and the rest of Section 9. While there won't be a section discussing the gun's other configurations in GFL, due to the fact that the Unica 6 is a recent addition to the game, I hope that the extended section of the Autorevolver's appearances in other media that discusses other low-bore firing revolvers like the Chiappa Rhino and RSH-12 makes up for it. And with that, we've come to an end, and see you for the next video.